Hello and welcome to Nowhere. I'm Kurt the Gardener, and I want to thank you if you came by to visit with me today. If you want to hit the subscribe button, and if you want to hit the like button, it helps people find the channel. That's only if you want to, though. All right, so today, guys, I want to talk about protection from the ego. And I want to talk about what that means and how that comes about. Protection from the ego's perspective can get downright ugly, demeaning, and twisted. The ego will try to protect you by finding some reason you aren't good enough, or qualified enough, or prepared enough, and in worst cases, by convincing you to be ugly, demeaning, and twisted to the outside world. You must not confuse yourself with the ego just because it shows you fictions and thoughts of a character that looks like you. Which is if both you and the ego look the same from your understanding and perspective, and that's not who or what the ego is. Then what does the ego look like and who is it? The ego looks like no one that anyone can describe because the ego simply isn't anyone. The ego isn't even there. When you reach out to grab the ego or look for the ego, you only find darkness to reach out and grab or see and behold. No one knows who or what the ego is or looks like because it's not who is, but what is the ego that does matter, and what it does that matters. The ego, to be simple here, is the ego is a doing, an action, an event, a word, not to describe you, but a word to describe a mechanism, a reaction, or a function that occurs is the ego. The ego is both the stimuli and stimulus, but also the product of a stimulation. In that I mean something externally stimulated, the brain and mind, you experienced something happened with you, there was an event. And thus the ego was stimulated and proceeded to stimulate based on the stimuli the ego received. When this occurred, the ego began stimulating a response in the form, if processed to be the most effective at stimulating you to act based on your historical patterns, which is really just data you created from past actions that were stored somewhere within you as experiences and without you also. But that's not the point here today, ladies and gentlemen. I'm trying to word something incredibly difficult to word with the words I have available. The issue arises due to our misinterpretation and the ego's misinterpretation and misunderstanding what created the data to begin with. The misunderstanding is in the fact the brain labels it all as life and death with a bias to survive at all costs. It isn't experience per se, but survival in a hostile environment, which is most definitely what the ego sees and interprets it as. And thus, the ego tries to protect you by not only convincing you, but showing you how to do that yourself. And based on learning, as in your learning, it too is learning. It teaches you while it increasingly gets better and more proficient at its methods and using the tools at its disposal. It is when we become confused that we are the ego and believe we must do what is being shown to us and told to us. That is when we forget who and what we are. That is when we begin to, as they say, serve the ego. Does this make the ego evil? I don't think so, no. The ego can't be good or evil because it's simply not possible. The ego isn't a who, but a what, and more of a function at that. Minds are like movie theaters, fantastical rooms that the ego uses to compel and control us in the name of what it believes is our own good or best interest. This is the ego's best attempt and tool to protect us through the mind, although it's not always the ego with the mind. By using the mind, it inaccurately manipulates us to do what it believes we must for the best and most survival based in a hostile environment outcome that results in our survival in one way or another. Perhaps the questions we could also ask alongside how do I kill the ego? How to kill the ego should be how can I reform the ego? And how do I let the ego know everything is fine? Or maybe how to let your ego down easily. Or how about this one? How to deal with my ego's energy and emotion, abuse and addiction. When the ego drives us to yelling matches with it, at what point do we resemble Grandpa Simpson from the Simpsons meme, shaking our fists at the flock of birds in the sky as the meme headlines, Old Man Argues with Ego? You, me, not anyone can argue with no one. And that's exactly what we do when we argue, fuss, and fight with the ego. It's as the saying goes, the best way to win is not to play. We fight no one, not even ourselves. How can we when the ego is no one, ever, especially to begin with? If you want to know how to stop the ego, first, you must not just know or understand, but you must realize the ego is not anyone, and that means you. You are not the ego. Know the ego not by who, but what it is. Second, you're going to have to make lots of changes. What you have collected must be removed from all of you. It is not a quest to reset you, but the ego. It is as it says and is described very esoterically in many different spiritual practices or religions and texts and whatnot. Our God is a cleansing fire. You must be cleansed because unless you are cleansed, then they described it as a fire because a fire incinerates. It purifies, it cleans, it does many things. The metaphorical library is vast and large. Pick your poison, but the point is this: it all must fall away from you and really maybe fall out of you because it's inside of you. So it's got to be, you don't literally set yourself on fire, your body on fire, your physical on fire. You set everything you've collected and you're holding and storing inside, you set that on fire. And you do that through many different ways, and there isn't one universal way to do it. There's many practices, many walks, many ways to the destination. And finally, third, as long as you collect, there will be an ego. The spiritual journey here is not always so much about growing, but weeding so that you may grow, maintenance. In this part, you are taming by resetting the ego, by being purified back to even beyond factory settings. Your skill with life, how you've practiced living, how you've learned to live, that will remain. But the current iteration of the ego is what will go. The less ego you have within this container of a body, as we call it, the more room for God you, me, and everybody in between will have. And I want to leave you with this thought. kind of sum up what I wrote. By living, you will collect. By skill, you will know how to collect. By experienced wisdom, you will know what is worth collecting. So, guys, I want to thank you if you've stuck around and listened and whatnot. Comment, talk to me. I hope you guys have a great day. And remember, I'm Kurt the Gardener, and you're always welcome in nowhere. Have a great day.